It started on a quiet morning, the kind of morning when the birds sang a little louder than usual, and the fields behind my old farmhouse glistened with dew. I had lived in that place for years, taking pride in every board and every nail that held my barn together. That barn wasn't just a structure to me. It was a part of my life, a reminder of the hard work I had put in over the years, and a place where I stored more than tools and hay. Memories lived inside it. Memories of raising livestock, of fixing old engines, of evenings where I just leaned against the beams and listened to the world go quiet. It was mine, and every inch of it meant something to me. But then, things began to shift. I noticed trucks driving slowly past my property more often than usual. Strangers would stop at the edge of the dirt road, looking toward my barn as if measuring it with their eyes. I had a gut feeling something was off. You can tell when people are just passing by and when people are planning something. These weren't curious neighbors. These were people watching. At first, I told myself maybe I was overthinking it. But then one night I heard footsteps crunching over the gravel outside. My dog growled low, and I peered out from behind the curtains to see two figures standing in the yard, flashlights in hand, shining directly toward the barn. They didn't notice me watching them. They didn't seem to care that someone might be home. My heart started racing. That barn wasn't just wood and metal. It was part of my life, and I wasn't about to let anyone lay a hand on it. The next morning, I checked around the barn and found scratches near the lock, as if someone had tried to pry it open. That was when it hit me. They weren't just looking, they were trying. And if they were bold enough to come once, they'd come again. I didn't know who they were, but I knew one thing. They underestimated me. You see, most people in town knew me as the quiet guy with the barn, someone who kept to himself and minded his own business. What they didn't know was my past. Years ago, I served in the military. I had stood guard in deserts, marched through jungles, and lived through nights darker than anyone back here could imagine. And when you've been through that, you don't look at a couple of intruders the same way. You look at them as a challenge you already know how to handle. But I wasn't about to act recklessly. I knew better than that. Instead, I set up quietly. I reinforced the barn's lock, moved some things inside to make space, and positioned myself where I could keep watch. If they thought I was some helpless farmer, they were about to learn a lesson. Sure enough, just a few nights later, I heard it again. The sound of gravel shifting under tires. This time, a truck pulled up right near the barn. The headlights shut off, and I could hear at least 3 voices, low and serious. They thought it was going to be easy. They thought they could just take what wasn't theirs. I stayed calm, my breathing steady just like I had been trained. One of them pulled out a crowbar and started working at the lock again. The others looked around nervously, whispering about whether I was home. They didn't know I was just a few feet away, watching, waiting. And then, right as they pried open the first latch, I stepped forward. The light from their flashlights caught me, and for a split second, everything went quiet. I could see the surprise on their faces, the way their bodies stiffened. They expected some old man to come yelling, maybe even begging them not to take anything. What they got instead was me standing there with the kind of calmness they didn't understand. One of them, trying to sound tough, barked at me to go back inside. He said something about how this was their barn now, that I couldn't stop them. But my silence unsettled them more than words ever could. I didn't move. I didn't argue. I just looked at them the way I had looked at men halfway across the world when the stakes were life or death. That stare alone made them shift uneasily, and then came the moment they weren't ready for. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I didn't grab a weapon. I didn't raise my voice. I just took out one small card, the one that carried my history, my service, my years in uniform, my military ID, held it in the beam of their flashlight so they could see it clearly. And when their eyes locked on it, their whole attitude changed. Their tough talk died in their throats, and I could see the gears turning in their heads. That wasn't just an ID card. To them, it was a warning, a story, a reminder that the man standing in front of them had been trained for situations far more dangerous than this. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the crickets in the fields and the nervous shifting of their boots in the gravel. One of them muttered something under his breath, something about not wanting trouble, and another pulled the crowbar back from the lock. I could see fear creeping into their eyes. They had no idea who they had just tried to steal from, and now they were realizing it. I didn't chase them. I didn't have to. The look on their faces told me they wouldn't be back. They backed away slowly, then faster, until finally they scrambled into their truck and sped off down the dirt road, kicking up dust in their rush to leave. I stood there in the quiet again, the barn behind me, my ID still in my hand, and a strange calm washed over me. It wasn't about scaring them away. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reminding myself that no matter how quiet my life had become, the discipline and strength I carried from those years in the military were still with me. That barn was more than a building, and I was more than they thought I was. But little did I know, that night wasn't the end of it. That moment when they saw my military ID, it was just the beginning. Because sometimes, when people realize they can't take something easily, they don't give up, they change tactics, and I had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, I walked the property line, my boots crunching against the dirt as the sun rose over the horizon. Everything looked the same on the surface. The barn stood tall, the fields swayed softly with the breeze, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the night before had only been round one. Men like that don't just walk away forever. Their pride doesn't let them. If they couldn't steal it easily, they'd try harder, and that thought gnawed at the back of my mind like a restless shadow. My neighbors, bless their hearts, started whispering about how strangers had been seen in town. Men nobody recognized hanging around the gas station, asking casual questions about properties out in the country. My property. People mentioned a barn more than once. And when I heard that, I knew my suspicion was right. Those men weren't done with me. I could have gone straight to the sheriff, and maybe I should have. But in a small town like ours, things had a way of slipping through the cracks. The sheriff knew me, respected me, but he also knew these kinds of incidents often fizzled out on their own. He'd tell me to lock my doors, maybe add a new light, and call it a day. That wasn't going to cut it. I wasn't about to wait around while someone planned to strip away something I'd built my life around. That night, I stayed up later than usual, sitting in the kitchen with a single lamp on, listening to the sounds outside. My dog paced near the door, ears pricked, restless, as if he sensed the same unease I did. Hours passed, and then I heard it again, the faint rumble of an engine on the dirt road, headlights cutting briefly through the trees before going dark. This time, they didn't even bother parking far away. They rolled right up, like they owned the place, like they were daring me to come out. I moved slowly, deliberately, stepping out onto the porch where the shadows hid me. There were more of them this time, 5 men, not 3. 2 trucks. And they weren't whispering anymore. They were loud, confident, laughing as they pulled out tools. One of them even brought a chain, the kind you'd use to drag something heavy, maybe even to pull the barn doors off completely. My jaw tightened. They weren't here to scare me. They were here to destroy what they couldn't steal. I watched them for a moment before making my move. This wasn't the battlefield, but my training came rushing back all the same. You don't fight with rage, you fight with control. I stepped into the yard where the moonlight caught me, and the laughter died on their lips. One of them cursed under his breath when he recognized me. Another tried to wave me off, telling me to just go back inside because it was none of my business. None of my business. My barn, my land, my life. I didn't raise my voice, but I let every word carry. I told them I'd given them one chance to walk away, and they had taken it. Now they had come back, and that meant there would be consequences. I didn't say it like a threat. I said it like a fact. That difference made them pause. One of the younger ones stepped forward, puffing his chest out, calling me an old man who couldn't do anything to stop them. He told me times had changed, that nobody cared about some military past anymore, and that I was outnumbered. For a second, I thought about how much he reminded me of recruits I'd seen decades ago. Cocky, overconfident, thinking the world owed them something, the kind who got themselves in trouble fast. And here's where things took a turn. You see, I had prepared for this. After the first night, I hadn't just sat around waiting. I had cameras set up, quiet and discreet, watching every angle of that barn. I had already recorded their truck plates from the first time. And this time, as they strutted around thinking they were in control, I let them know. I told them every second of what they were doing was being recorded, and by sunrise I'd have a copy in the sheriff's office. That got their attention. The bravado slipped. They glanced around, looking for the cameras, trying to spot what they couldn't see. Their leader snarled, telling the others I was bluffing. But the way his voice cracked told me he wasn't sure. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to wave my arms. I just had to stand there steady, calm, reminding them that this wasn't a game. But here's the hook. What really broke their confidence wasn't the cameras, and it wasn't my words. It was what I pulled out of my pocket again, slowly, carefully, the same way as before. My military ID. I held it up so the moonlight hit it just right. This time, though, I didn't just show it. I told them exactly what it meant. That I had been trained to hold ground when outnumbered. That I had faced men tougher than them and walked away standing. And that if they wanted to test me, they'd better be ready for the kind of fight they didn't understand. Silence. You could feel the tension tighten like a rope between us. They looked at me, then at each other, and I could see the cracks spreading in their confidence. One of them muttered something about this not being worth it. Another started, tugging at the arm of the one holding the chain, trying to get him to back off. And then, almost like a wave breaking, their whole stance shifted. What had been arrogance turned into hesitation, and hesitation turned into retreat. They backed off again, slower this time, their pride making it hard for them to admit what they already knew. They weren't going to win here. The trucks roared to life, the tires spinning in the dirt as they pulled away. I stood there until the sound faded, the night once again settling into silence. But I knew this wasn't finished. Twice they had come, and twice they had left with nothing but frustration. And men like that, they don't just quit. They stew, they plan, they come back harder. And as I stood there under the moon, the barn behind me solid and unbroken, I realized something else. They weren't just after the barn anymore. They were after me. What I didn't know at that moment was that their next move would be bigger, bolder, and far more dangerous than anything they had tried before. And when it came, it wouldn't just test my strength. It would test my very limits. Days passed after their second attempt, but the air around the farm didn't feel the same. I kept doing my work, feeding the animals, fixing the fences, tending to the land, but every sound made me pause. A truck backfiring in the distance, boots crunching on gravel. Even the wind against the barn doors felt heavier. My gut told me they weren't done. And when your instincts are carved out of years of military service, you learn never to ignore them. One evening, as the sky bled into orange and purple, I noticed something strange. The birds in the trees had gone silent, the way they do when something isn't right. My dog growled low, his ears pinned back. That's when I heard it, a vehicle, but not approaching from the road this time. From the back field, near the woods. They'd gotten smarter, or at least they thought they had. I moved fast, cutting through the shadows, careful not to reveal myself too soon. And what I saw made my blood run cold. This time they hadn't come with chains or crowbars. They came with gasoline. Two of them carried red cans, sloshing liquid onto the dirt, aiming toward the barn doors. The others stood nearby, one with a lighter already flicking in his hand, sparks flashing in the dim light. That barn wasn't just wood and nails. It held years of sweat, tools passed down from my father, memories of long nights working through storms, and even the harvests that had kept us alive. To see them ready to burn it all down, it was more than theft. It was war. I didn't hesitate. Stepping out from behind the shadows, I shouted loud enough to shake them. The sound startled them, and one nearly dropped his can. I told them to stop right where they stood, that if they struck a single flame, it wouldn't just be the barn they'd have to answer for. But here's where the story takes the sharpest turn. Instead of backing off like before, their leader stepped forward. His face was twisted with anger, his pride bleeding from the failures of the last 2 nights. He called me out, said he wasn't scared of some old man waving around stories of the military. He said the cameras, the ID, none of it mattered anymore. Tonight, he said, this ends. For a split second, I saw the fire in his eyes and knew this wasn't like before. They weren't here to scare me off or steal something quietly. They wanted to make a statement. And that's when I realized I had one last card to play, something I hadn't used yet. I reached into my jacket and pulled out something small, but powerful. Not a weapon, not a tool, my phone. I had been recording the entire scene live, broadcasting it straight to the sheriff's department and a few trusted neighbors. As I held it up, their faces shifted. This wasn't just me versus them anymore. This was them versus the entire community, versus the law, versus everyone who could now see exactly what they were about to do. One of them cursed, yelling at the leader that this was stupid, that they needed to leave. Another dropped his can, backing away slowly. But the leader still stood there, shaking with rage, lighter in his hand. He tried to flick it again, but his hand trembled so badly the spark wouldn't hold. That was the moment everything changed, because from the road, headlights suddenly cut through the dark. The sheriff's car, followed by another truck I recognized. It was my neighbor, rifle slung across his shoulder, standing tall in the bed of his pickup. They had come fast, quicker than I expected. Turns out when you've spent years building trust, people show up when you need them most. The thieves froze, caught like animals in a trap. The sheriff's voice boomed as he ordered them to drop everything. My neighbor, silent but steady, aimed his rifle high just to make sure nobody got clever. And slowly, one by one, the men lowered their tools, their cans, their pride. The lighter clattered against the dirt. The fire in their eyes was gone, replaced with the cold reality that they had lost. The sheriff cuffed them right there under the stars, their trucks impounded, their night finished. But the leader, he kept staring at me, even as he was dragged away. His eyes burned, not with victory, but with a hatred that came from knowing he'd been beaten by someone he thought was weak. He spat in the dirt, swearing under his breath that this wasn't over. But here's the truth. It was over. Because he'd made his biggest mistake already, thinking he could break a man who had been trained to hold the line no matter the odds. Thinking he could burn down not just a barn, but the spirit of someone who had fought battles far worse than this. When the dust settled and the flashing lights faded, I walked back to the barn. The wood was still solid. The air still smelled like hay, not gasoline. I placed my hand against the door and felt the steady weight of everything it stood for. It wasn't just a building. It was proof that sometimes the strongest defense isn't about fists or weapons, but about resolve. About refusing to bend no matter who stands against you. And so, to anyone listening, here's what I want you to remember. People will test you. They'll push against the walls of your life, trying to see if you'll break. They'll laugh, threaten, even try to tear down what you've built. But when you stand your ground with courage, when you lean on your training, your faith, and your community, you find strength they'll never understand. The thieves thought they could take my barn, but what they didn't realize was that it wasn't just about wood and nails. It was about legacy, resilience, and the spirit of a man who refuses to be intimidated. They walked away in chains, and I stood tall, the barn behind me untouched, my resolve stronger than ever. And as I turned off the porch light that night, the land wrapped in quiet once more, I couldn't help but think. Sometimes, life doesn't give you the battles you expect, but when they come, you face them head on. Because in the end, it's not about what they try to take from you, it's about what you refuse to give up.